Hello and good morning. I'm the facilitator. I had a problem saying that word. My name's Louise, and we're going to do some housekeeping first. So, racism is the slogan of the group Erace, which was formed in New Orleans in the summer of 1993. We seek ways through person to person communication to show that we are committed to treating all human beings with love, respect, empathy, compassion, and humility. Join us. Erace is an organization that does not espouse any political party, and we have no religious affiliation. We believe in acceptance of all people, and no personal attacks of any kind will be tolerated. We come with the intention to listen, learn, and not to argue. Land acknowledgement. We begin today by acknowledging that what we know as the United States is the ancestral and unceded territory of many indigenous peoples, and that there are many more nations and tribes that could be named here. Members of our meeting group today are on the lands of the Chitimacha and Choctaw in New Orleans, the Creeks and Cherokees in Atlanta, the Tonkawan, Lipan Apache, and Comanche in Austin, the Lenape and Piscataway in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples in Boston, the Cahuilla and Mojave in Riverside, and the Lumbee in Fayetteville. We thank their ancestors for being stewards of these lands through the generations and through today. We need to protect and honor the history and people of these places. Despite the centuries of colonial theft and violence, we should always remember that we are still on indigenous land, and it will always be indigenous land. So for those, well, we're all old hands at it, but I'll go through the format. Is everyone obviously keep yourselves on mute. Um, uh, and if you want to get on the list, you raise one hand, wave it around so I can see it better. If you, everyone has 2 minutes. If you have a clarifying question, you raise two fingers, wave it around. And the clarifying question is after the speaker is finished. The example is, I didn't understand what you meant by a word or a term, or can you clarify what you meant by, and it's not just to jump in and say your piece, or if you argue that viewpoint, get on the list if you want to do that. But clarifying questions are really just for clarifying questions. So I'm going to go and get you all to introduce yourselves, and then I'll say why I bought the topic, and we'll get going. So Phyllis, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yep, good morning. I'm Phyllis. I'm in New Orleans and I've been coming since 2008.
Thank you. Beatrice.
Hi, good morning. Beatrice in East Point outside of Atlanta. Been coming since 93, 94 when I lived in New Orleans.
Thank you. Nancy.
Good morning. I'm Nancy. I'm in the New Orleans area. I've been coming to Erace since June of 2007.
Thank you. Pedro, welcome back.
Yeah, I'm Pedro Gatos here in Austin. I've been coming, or I have not been coming for a while, but been coming, I think, since about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe. And it's good to be back. And I wanted to apologize for not coming, but I have this radio program I do, and I do all my preparation on Saturday and Sunday, all the editing of the interview. So it just, but anyhow, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Marion. You're muted. Still muted. Marion, you're muted. We can't hear you. Okay, we'll get back to you. Teresa.
Hi, I'm Teresa, and I'm in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and I've been coming since August 2022.
Thank you. Larry.
Good morning, I'm Larry, and I've been coming to Erace since 1995. Good to be here.
Thank you. Marion, what do you think? Can you just click the little icon that has a microphone on it? Bottom left-hand side should be. No. Okay, well, we'll get back to you at some point. So I bought this because I did have another article I wanted to bring, but it was way too long, and I think it had also been covered in a few meetings before. So I was scrabbling to get something, and I don't know. I think it's very important. But it's and the article does repeat itself a little bit. I'll give it that. But it also makes you think that there are factors that minority groups have to deal with that the rest of us don't, and we have no idea of how it affects you. And the raised stresses, I thought that was, an interesting point. In the past few years, since Charlottesville and all the school shootings, and I mean, these stresses are causing medical problems and illness and shortening lives of people. And we won't go into how. Well, we'll see how this conversation goes. Anyway, if you want to get on the list, please raise a finger and we can get started. Who wants to start us off? Don't be shy. Oh, Larry, sorry. Go ahead, Larry. Is your hand raised? It looks like there's a hand on there.
No.
Oh, okay. I wonder what that
It's
was.
totally the hand from your cursor.
Yep, you are right. Okay. Anyone want to start? Oh, okay. Beatrice and then Nancy. Go ahead, Beatrice.
Yeah, without going deeply into all of that the article has to say, just to expose the idea of social determinants that people tend not to deal with, think about, plan for the issues that surround what they might think is an issue. For example, school issues, people will consider, like our legislature, vouchers. They don't think about poverty. They don't think about the social determinants of school issues. And so we tend to make judgments and plan not based on information that really affects people's lives. And a lot of it is budgetary concerns. You have people, not social workers, not people who see things differently, perceive things differently, making decisions about people's lives. And where the medical profession is concerned, there's just so many, and this is a minor thing, but that little post-ox thing that people put on their fingers, it has been discovered that it is affected by melanin, so that it is not an accurate predictor of the oxygen intake of African Americans and people with melanin. 4 or 5 years ago, there were some Harvard medical students who were interviewed, and they decided that they really believed that African Americans did not feel pain as deeply as other groups. I mean, as other groups, because our skin is deeper. And finally, the idea of weathering that people use when they talk about the maternal mortality. The state of Georgia has a high rate of women who give birth dying within the first year of birth. And that this idea that being an African American, the stressors, the things that happen in your life that this article refers to, affect the lives of the mother, the life of the mother. And consequently, African American females are more likely to die during a year after birth. And it's just stuff you're living with, and it doesn't matter socioeconomic level. And so I think this article reveals a lot of that, but those are just some thoughts that I had, particularly about social determinants, about thinking about what surrounds a person in their life.
Thank you. Teresa had a clarifying question for you, Beatrice. Go ahead.
Yeah, Beatrice, I think I missed the first part of what you were saying about they put a ring on their finger or something. What were you talking about?
No, baby, I'm talking about the little pulse ox. You know, like when you go in the hospital, they try and determine the level of your absorption of oxygen. It's that little clip thing, you know? You don't know what I'm talking about.
It's over your
Oh,
finger like that.
okay.
Yeah, it fits like that on your finger.
And that doesn't work on Black people?
Well, I have read that because of the melanin in our skin, it is not an accurate predictor of our intake of oxygen, of the body's absorption. It's not accurate. And if the doctor
I've learned something new. Thank you. I
right,
got to look at of
yeah,
all the health disparities. Thank you.
Thank
Another one to
you.
worry about.
Right.
okay.
Nancy. And after her, it's open. So anyone else wants to join, let me know.
When I first started reading the article, I thought it was more about the interactions and discrimination that groups of people experience in the medical profession and their interactions with the medical profession, because I mean, that has been documented as well. As Beatrice was saying that the medical profession thought that Black people don't feel pain, or they dismiss your concerns more readily when you have a concern about something, or something that you, or your input, even your input about yourself, in terms of what you're experiencing, even if it doesn't fit the symptoms or whatever that they're reading out of their little book or guidelines or whatever, and you're more readily dismissed, and not listened to, and not taking, or sometimes symptoms and whatnot present themselves differently in certain groups of people as opposed to the majority, and they've never learned about this, was never taught this in school, how these symptoms present in African Americans or Native Americans or Hispanic people or what have you. And they even now have commercials on television, particularly when it comes to dermatology, that specify that certain skin diseases look different on different groups of people. And certain doctors they'd never been presented this type of information when they were in training. So initially, that's what I thought the article was about, but I find out, no, it's about the stressors that it has on the body. And I can get back on the list later.
Okie dokie. Thank you, Nancy. Anyone want to jump in? The list is open.
Louise, this is Larry. I hate to come in this way, but you know, my icon on the bottom of my laptop that shows me putting myself on mute and video is it disappeared.
That's
And,
okay. But do you want to get on the list? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, I do, but you know, I hate to have this to be the only way I could
That's all
get
right. Hey,
recognized.
no problem. Larry, you're on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a particular take on this article, because it seems to be ignoring the fact that African Americans or anybody else make bad choices,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes bad choices leads to health disparities. And I don't want everything to seem like it's tied in to discrimination. I mean, I read this article through, and there's 63 references to the word discrimination, some variation of the word, but there's hardly anything in the article that deals with racism and white supremacy. So, and then you said one of the reasons you chose this article was that factors that minority groups have to deal with that the rest of us don't. Well, who are the rest of us? We all deal with factors, the same bad choices that minorities make concerning alcohol and cigarettes and drugs are the same choices that's available to white people, and white people have the same effect and disparities from all of these bad choices that black people have. So I wouldn't want us to have too much of a condescending attitude as if them poor black people, because they've been discriminated against, it just leads to all of this stress and things that they're going through. So I just let that hold me for now.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Pedro, go ahead.
Yeah, I think when they talk about social determinants, they're not just talking, it's a determinant, and there are many other determinants, and there's a bunch of them out there that together can cause health issues. So one of the things I'm familiar with is, multiple really well done studies looked at,
Gotcha.
if you're poor, um, the top 10% versus the bottom 10% was one example that there can be of wealth. That is, there can be a differences more than a decade long of life expectancy. Um, and so people would argue, well, that's why African Americans um, have so many health issues, is because of the overrepresentation in the poor deals. But as Beatrice said correctly, they actually look at women from the same socioeconomic, and I'm talking about higher income categories, and those women, African American women, having significantly more risks giving birth and those types of things. So, there are other things going on, and the weatherization the weathering that I think Beatrice mentioned too was Dr. Geronimus was this woman doctor that talked about weathering, so that discrimination, whether it be by race, by sex, or by whatever, uh, or whether it be poverty, create uh, uh, much more stress that has an effect on what she identified as telomeres. It's a genetic strands that we have that, if they're compromised, results in reduced years of life. So there's a lot of scientific, uh, real validated research that just indicates that regardless of the discrimination source, it costs years of life, or can cause years of life.
Thank you, Pedro. Great timing. So I have Nancy and then Beatrice. Is there anyone else right now that wants to get on?
You can put me on.
Okay, Glenn, you are on. Nancy, go ahead.
Okay. In regard to choices, okay, there was a series on, I forget, it might have been Hulu, I think. Anyway, it was entitled Little Fires Everywhere. And it had in there Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington. And Kerry Washington's character moved into an apartment that was rented to her by Reese Witherspoon. Anyway, these two women got into a conversation about children, about raising children, having children, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, Kerry Washington was arguing with Reese Witherspoon about apparently why certain decisions that she had made in her past life. Okay. Reese Witherspoon is like, don't blame us, I guess meaning white people, for the choices that you have made in your life. Okay. Carrie Witherspoon responded with, you can make better choices because you had better choices. Okay. And so when you look a lot of times at the choices that African Americans have or any marginalized group may have, I mean, look at your neighborhood at times where you live. Is it your fault that there's not a grocery store that you can walk to? Is it your fault that all you see is beer, soda, ice stores in the neighborhood? That's what you have to purchase your food from. All right. That there is not certain outlets that are available to other demographics that are not available to you in your neighborhood. That is, I mean, maybe it's by economics and or by design. But the point is, what choices do you have? There have been studies done that show your zip code is a huge determinant in your life, what your life is going to turn out to be by your zip code. That's it.
Great, good point. Sorry, we got Beatrice and then Glenn.
Right. The article talks about stressors and the different kinds of circumstances that result in the stress that affects you physically. And just the threat. They talked about this discriminatory violence, that people living in neighborhoods where there is more violence, more likelihood that there will be shootings, or that just the constant stress of raising children in places where you're not sure they're safe because of the environment. That's a stressor. I was going in the door of my house and I heard some bang bang, but I knew, because I don't live far from the interstate, that it was a backfire, and it didn't dawn upon me it was anything but backfire. In other words, I don't have to go around worrying about if I hear a sound, it's a shot, and do we need to duck and go in the bathtub like some families have to do. Living with that kind of stress it affects one, and it is not a choice that one makes, as Nancy's saying. Zip codes determine a whole lot. The quality of the school, which is, then how do you get a good job? Then how do you get out of that circumstance? What kinds of food are you able to acquire? These are not choices that people make. Poverty, the state of Georgia, or maybe the city of Atlanta, I don't know which one, it is harder to get out of the lower economic level than any other city. I mean, people just are stuck, and you don't have the resources to turn things around. And so then the clinic is not near, and then the hospital closes, then there's no good health care. And so it's just a series of circumstances where people are making choices that I don't even have to think about. Am I, well, will I be able to get a nice warm? I was telling Phyllis that we serve people on unsheltered people sandwiches and so forth. We used to on this particular street. They're clearing this street because Martin Luther King weekend is coming, and it's not far from a church. They killed a man. The truck ran into a man in a tent who was there. He's homeless. This man did not choose to be homeless. He didn't choose to be run over by a truck. I mean, so there are stressors that are in people's lives. They're not choices. They're choices that they are not able to make. A choice has been made for them, but disposable.
Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you very much. Glenn and then Teresa.
Okay, I really love the two previous people who spoke, but I just don't love what they be saying. Uh, Now, it is a choice. Don't tell me they ain't got no choice. I don't want to hear that.
Larry.
Gotcha.
When I was born in the 50s, I didn't have to jump in no tub to hide from some bullets, because there was no bullets flying in my neighborhood. Anywhere that you live in New Orleans, which is a violent city right now, but anywhere you lived in New Orleans, you didn't have to worry about being shot in the 50s. So people made a choice and the change of their morals. They made that choice to change their morals. The children of the great grandchildren of those people who lived in the 50s uh, made the choice that they weren't going to follow that moral choice that their great grandparents made. Caring about one another, caring about the neighbor. There was a village. You didn't have to worry about your children. There was a village. So there was a conscious choice to move away from the village. You had to take responsibility and stop putting it all on the white man. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Teresa. And Nancy,
Hi.
got you.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. I'm gonna put a suggestion in the chat. There's a Netflix series called Made. If you haven't seen it, it's a limited series. Oh my God. We need to talk about choices that she had available to her and choices that she didn't, and da da da. This series does it very, very, very well. Just that recommendation. But what I know, just in my own life, when I broke my ankle, I mean, I'm a very active person. I thought, ah, now I can't go out dancing. I couldn't go to my 25th high school re all these things I couldn't do. But you know what I didn't do? I never lost sleep because I couldn't afford the medication, the surgery. I took 2 weeks off. I had proper Oh, no, that's a bit. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I had insurance. I had a full-time job. I had benefits. There are things that now you can say, well, I chose to be a teacher at that point. I chose to, but there are also choices. I wasn't living in a food desert. I wasn't, yeah, there are some things, but I didn't choose to be born into the family that I was born into. I didn't choose to be raised with the values I was raised in. So, this idea that you have 100% choice, and I love the example of, well, I didn't choose to be in a bathtub because nobody was shooting. If you did catch a bullet, does that mean you chose to catch it? I mean, there are some things that I have never chosen to be rear-ended. Somebody lost control of their car and rear-ended me. That's happened to me a couple of times. But that's not me choosing to do that. That is why we call it an accident. Some circumstances led to that. And I know the last time I was rear-ended, they were screwing around on their phone. I didn't choose for the driver behind me to be on their phone and not pay attention. So there are choices that or things that happen to you that you have no control over. And I'll go out on a limb and say, I don't think people choose to be addicts. I think that is something that is wired in them. And a really strange story, but I have some friends who are in the film industry. They could not get, at one point, Robert Downey Jr. insurance to do their movie because it was too expensive. And they're like, but we're going to have him in Egypt. We're going to have him isolated. So he cannot choose to do drugs. But then again, he's Robert Downey Jr. If he wanted drugs, he could use that, kind of a weird choice there, but they were trying to figure out how to isolate the superstar so the insurance premium would be low enough they ended up casting someone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Larry, you had wanted to be on the list, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so Larry and then Nancy.
Do you see Pedro, Luis?
I do not. He's on a
Okay,
different
he's
screen.
been waving his hand, baby.
Sorry, Pedro. Yes, I got you now. So Larry, Nancy, Pedro.
Okay. So in the Bible, when Israel was at a certain point, yes, Beatrice, I know it might get under your skin, but when Israel was at a certain point, the elders of Israel came to Samuel and said, make us a king so we could be like other nations. And when Samuel got grieved over that, The Lord told Samuel not to be grieved because they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being God over them. So a lot of the problems African Americans may have inflicted upon themselves is when we sought to be like white people. We sought to be like white people. And white people did not set the standards for morals. We made bad choices. We made bad choices. Sometimes we were forced to make bad choices, but still we made bad choices. White people made bad choices. White people chose an attitude of white supremacy. That was a choice they made because they thought they were better than others. Some of the choices black people made was because they were made to feel that they were lower than others. And so, yes, it boils down, it goes back to choices. And when we think that choices does not play a role in the lives of any people, not just black people, of any people,
Got you, Mom.
you know, we all make bad choices. Whether we're rich and white or poor and black, we all make bad choices. We made a choice to choose Trump, and now we got to live with it. The oligarchs are going to be in charge of America. We got to live with it. From one standpoint, bad choices, bad choices. And so, you know, sometimes these are conversations that might be best in some instances within the realm of a room of black people. But nevertheless, some whites need to know that all blacks don't think the same way, to think that all of our situations are because of discrimination. No.
Thank you, Larry. Nancy, Pedro, and then Amal.
I think that in some instances, we are talking about apples and oranges when it comes to choices. Okay, there's different types of choices. Okay, yes, you can choose to make a bad choice when it comes to your morality. Okay, yes, you can. All right, but when it comes to the choice of where you go to school and you're 8 years old, you don't have a choice. If it comes to where the nearest clinic is and you live in a medical desert, you don't have a choice. Okay, some things you have a choice about, but some things you don't. And some things are controlled by a higher economic. I'm not talking about spiritual, I'm talking about economic power that dictates and governs your life. Yes, if you have or come from a family, you can't choose your family when you're 8 years old. So whether you live in a family that is of spiritually minded, morality minded, takes you to church every weekend, teaches you right from wrong, that's fine. But you might grow up at 8 years old in a crackhead family. They don't care about Jesus or Christ or morality or anything else. They're concerned about their next fix. That's all they're concerned about. Where they're going to get their next hit from. And you're left to fend for yourself. So yes, some things you do have a choice about, and some things you don't have a choice about. And if you've never lived in that environment, then don't speak about what you don't know. That's it.
Thank you so much. We have Pedro and then Amal.
Put me on there.
Say what? You want back on there?
Yeah, I want to let her know I lived in that environment. Go ahead.
Okay, baby. Okay. Hey.
Put Larry on that too.
Okay, Glenn and then Larry. Go ahead, Pedro.
Well, I sure am glad I got on before Glenn.
Beatrice, your hand up.
Anyhow, I think, you know, the point that Glenn makes is that we all have choices is a true statement. It's not an all or nothing thing, though, is what I would try to say. A lot of times, that's what gets turned into an all or nothing thing. And when you think all or nothing, you can always attack the other side. I think what's being said is that sometimes the consequences of a bad choice is different from someone that has resources from someone that doesn't have resources. And to Nancy's point, those choices are circumscribed. That's what structured inequality is all about. I mean, it's just indicating inferior schools. They're moving more and more money away from public schooling into private schooling, that type of thing. Those types of things are all involved in this and then also the consequences of a choice are different. If somebody makes a bad choice, which we all do, they may not be able to ultimately rebound from the bad choice, as I mentioned, than somebody else that has more resources and such. So nobody's saying that it's all based on discrimination. You're destined to lose all the time and all that. And there's always people that survive environments and move on to be very, very successful. It's only when you compare the number that make it to the ones that don't make it, and you realize that many of those that don't make it tried just as hard as the people that made it, but just were unsuccessful due to these objective conditions that everybody's been kind of alluding to. So I think it's not an all or nothing issue when it comes to choice.
Thank you, Pedro. Amal, you're next.
Can you hear me?
Certainly can.
You know, there's always been a very uneasy relationship between the healthcare industry and Black people, and other people get added on to that list. There's never been a time since the inception of any form of medical science where Black people have been at the better end of that stick. I was watching a documentary and I found this out, and I think it had to do with the healthcare discrepancies between Black people and the government, if you will. And I found out that during this stuff goes back as far as slavery. I mean, the field of gynecology was advanced using female slaves to advance it.
Oh, yeah.
And God knows what they were doing to these women on these plantations to further the field of gynecology. And the list goes on and on and on. So I think that when the numbers that they were giving in this article, I'm actually not surprised by when they talk about the gap between the health care that Black people and others receive. This has never been a time when it was good for us. It's never been a time. You can, however far back you want to go with it, you'll find a time when it was an uneasy relationship between the healthcare industry or the medical industry, however you want to word it, and Black people. Medical science, the advance of medical science. We all know about the Tuskegee experiment, and the list goes on and on and on. So this was a very interesting article to bring out, even now, because you always hear people say, "Oh, I can't believe that this is 2020, whatever," and they still doing that. And there was never a time when they stopped. It's always been happening. So don't be surprised by these numbers that you see in this article, because this stuff has always been going on as it relates to Black people in healthcare. We've always been at the worst end of the stick.
Thank you, Amal. We have Glenn, Larry, Beatrice, and Teresa. So, Glenn.
Hey, put me back on the list.
Put you back on? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm hearing all these examples of what people don't have. They don't have this market here. They got a food desert. Don't you know they got that don't you know there are millions of white people live the same way in America? don't have the good choices in school, don't have you go in some of these coal mining areas where all that's been shut down. You know, they're living in worse than some of these welfare people in New Orleans. Uh, they got some of these welfare people can go to some of the finest hospitals and get treated. Uh, so you know, uh, it's not no more of us just being discriminated against. It's it is many people being discriminated against in the medical field. That guy who killed that insurance man was not an African American who was mad at the insurance company because everybody is being abused by the insurance company. Okay, I think I think I made the point. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. We have Larry.
Hold on a minute. Yeah, Jose, Pedro. I mean, Pedro,
What?
um, Pedro.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, man. I ain't changed my opinion about you. You know, I used to think you was a communist, but I listen to the same programs you listen to now. You know.
Okay. Hey, let's do that at the wrap up or some other time.
uh,
Marion, you want on the list? I got you, but you need to work out your thingy. Okay. Larry, and then Beatrice, Teresa, Amal, and Marion. Okay, go, Larry.
Yeah, just for the record, Nancy, I lived in the environment that you spoke of, which was poor. I came out of the projects. Um, I lived in a time where the school books we got in elementary schools had already been in the white schools before they got to the black schools. I lived in the environment where I saw signs saying whites only and blacks only. I lived in a time when I read one ads in the newspapers to only get to the end of the article and saying we don't hire colored people. So this, I think this is just making more of the argument that we are living in a culture that says it's not your fault. And I think I don't care what color we are. That is the culture we're living in. It's not your fault. It's somebody else's fault. And as long as we could find somebody else to blame, how will we ever rise? You know, white supremacists blaming black people and immigrants for, you know, and black people blaming white supremacy. We all are going around in a circle. But there's a song we sing in the church, and it goes to the extent that it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. It's not my mother, not my father, not my sister, not my brother, but it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. So we all have to take a look in the mirror from time to time and say, is it me? And I think a lot of times we'll walk away and say, yes, it's me. I must be the change that I want to effect. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. I agree 100%.
Hey, point of order. Here we go. We have Beatrice.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. I'm sorry, a lot of thoughts. One of them, of course, Larry, you and I grew up in the same circumstances. In a sense, I grew up in a middle class home, but in terms of segregation, the books that we got that have been used, that is a very, very different time in terms of what communities could do to support themselves in a sense. I mean, we had a strong church, we had the scouts, we had this and this. The influences on families were different then. The halcyon time, the good times that Glenn talked about where neighbors knew each other, where there was a lady who had a sewing machine. She faced the street, Upper Line Street, and if I ever passed her and didn't say hello and hello, Miss Bernadette, my daddy would march me back and say, "Oh, Miss Bernadette said you didn't say hello." Miss Bernadette knew everything that was going on the street. She knew everybody. There are different influences in people's lives now. This is a different time. It's a different time, but also we cannot expect resilience, and I'm gonna pull myself up for my bootstraps today from anybody who doesn't have bootstraps or boots. And it is not fair. It is not fair to say that if you just do better, you make a better moral choice. It's almost like a but and it's not either or. It's all of it. Ask a child who has not been given a fair chance in life to struggle his way to college, to struggle his way to a career, when there's nothing in his life that tells him that he can't. We're not giving him any of the tools. He's not surrounded by people who are succeeding in that way. It's just a lot. And so these stressors that are the result of discrimination, we can't dismiss them by saying it's your fault. It's your fault that you're not doing better. It's your fault that you die in childbirth with your baby. It's your fault because you're not strong enough. It's your fault that you have high blood pressure because the police have all these extrajudicial killings. If you look at the discriminatory, the stresses that result from discriminatory violence, that's not people's fault. And people who self-medicate with drugs, the availability of guns, the lack of training in problem solve. There's just a lot.
Thank you.
Who fault is it?
Can you just get on the list?
No, I'm not on the list. I'm
Okay.
asking a question.
Glenn,
I
what are
can't
you
answer the
doing?
question?
Are you clarifying question or?
Yeah,
Well, say
yes,
that.
a clarifying question. Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah. Because I can't raise my finger because it's not
Okay,
working here.
Glenn,
All right.
like Glenn, like you said before, that you love the people and not their idea. I love you. I'm going to tell you, I'm not looking for fault, baby. I'm looking for reasons, rational, and how do we fix it? I'm not blaming. If I blame the person, that you say, whose fault is it? I'm not looking for fault. For me, that's not an issue. I'm looking for how do we fix it? How do we look at the social determinants that we can fix so people don't struggle all their lives?
So Teresa, I got you on there,
Okay.
Nancy.
All right. Thank you. Um, Amal, you were asking or you stating that Black people have always had a bad history with health insurance or healthcare industry. The only thing I can think of is that we, for the most part, have not become addicted to opioids because they don't give it to us anyway. I mean, it is horrible that the medical industry underestimates our pain. And I tell you what, I never thought about it at that time when I broke my ankle, but it was a good thing that I was in Austin and most people didn't look at me and think I was Black. Maybe I wouldn't have gotten uh, Oxycontin for my pain after my ankle surgery. As a matter of fact, I ended up giving it away. I don't know how people become addicted to a medication that makes you constipated and itch. I was like, I took myself off of that and just started drinking red wine. I was like, I know what can numb my pain. And anyway. And for those of you who are like 100% everything in your life happens to you is your choice like 100% instead of like a percentage. I can't, I want to know your experience the next 4 years when you're going to have more tech bros. Supposedly, that's the thing that we are set up now. I mean, I didn't choose. I voted against this president or this candidate 3 times, and I only got the other person once. So I definitely did not choose who this president was, nor his I love, I think it was Chris Rock who said the richest African American is now co-president because he spent $250 million anyway. So it's going to be interesting how your choices are going to like govern how much money is cut from the budget because you think that that's 100% your choice. So good luck to that. And as far as looking in the mirror and blaming yourself for the way you are in your life, again, for the next 4 years, we have someone in the highest office who will point his crooked finger at anyone else and never look at himself critically to say, I put myself in this position. I made these bad choices myself. It is always somebody else's problem, always somebody else's fault, and that person is now in the highest office. So I don't think our nation has learned that your choices, blah, blah, blah. I think, when you say you always looking for somebody to blame, we are about to get somebody on Monday who always blames others. Always.
Hmm. Thank you, Teresa. So next I've got Amal, and then I've got Marion, Nancy, Phyllis, and then Glenn again.
Larry.
And Larry. All righty. So Amal.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I was looking at the screen at a different angle. So yeah, in the article under the part where it's asked what is discrimination, and it goes on and it goes on and under that banner, and it talks about the different people and the percentages of them who say that they've been discriminated, or that they feel like they've been as a people they've been discriminated against in the United States. And it goes on to say 92% of Black Americans believe that discrimination against Black people exists in America, followed by 78% of Latino response, 75% of Native Americans, 61% of Asians, and 55% of whites, indicating their own racial group experiences racial discrimination. Like who's discriminating against these white people? I'm trying to figure out who are these white people that's being discriminated against and by who? Where is it coming from? Because if you look at these other groups, they have a history that they can point to of being discriminated against by whites. But who's discriminating against the white people, and what infrastructure in this country do they have that they can discriminate against white people? I'm looking for, I always use history to back up my present position, and I just don't know where in this history that these white people were being discriminated against by any of the groups that were mentioned outside of white people in the article. This amazes me. But once again, and the list goes on, and it talks about other groups of people. But nevertheless, I've not seen a history of discrimination against white people in the United States. And if so, I'd appreciate if somebody could point it out to me and tell me who was doing it.
Thank you. Good timing. Okay, Marion, you're up next. There you go.
Okay, I really just wanted to listen, but I understand the reason why. This brings back an unpleasant memory. It was resolved, but it was still unpleasant. This goes back to 1970. I went to a local hospital and I was assigned a doctor. This is my first pregnancy. So this is 55 years ago. I was in the examination room, just sitting in the chair. The doctor had my preliminary information, and he suggested, couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 minutes into it, maybe 4, maybe possibly 5 minutes, that I go to another hospital. And I asked him why I got worried. I said, do I have some kind of medical condition that you gleaned from my folder, that information there? He said, no, I just think it's best you go to another hospital. So I stood up and I just walked out of the room and I went to the desk. There happened to be another doctor, and it was a nurse who had come behind the desk. But I spoke to the lady who was the receptionist, and I said, "This doctor told me I should go to another hospital." So the doctor, that was behind the desk, he said, "Why did he tell you this?" I said, "I don't know." So he said, "Who is he?" And when I said it, all three people rolled their eyes, sucked their teeth, and then the male doctor said, "Everybody complains about this man. He has got to go." He was a white doctor, and all of the people involved behind the desk uh were white as well. So I did end up going to another uh obstetrician in the same hospital. To this day, I still don't. Well, I think maybe he was a bigot. The man who told me to go to another hospital originally. He did remain on the staff. I had all three of my children were born at the hospital. He did leave. I didn't see him anymore throughout that period. And my children, the first two were 2 years apart, and the last one was a surprise. So there's about a 10-year gap between my last child and my first child. But he was a bigot. The term wasn't that prevalent then, but I did realize later on that's who he was. But I was peeved, and I'm saying that in a polite way, that somebody, without telling me why, did go to another hospital and have your baby.
Right. Thank you, Marion. Nancy, Phyllis, Glenn, and Larry, and then we'll go into the wrap up. So, Nancy.
I don't listen to so much. I kind of forgot what my point was going to be, but I would say that, we're getting off into two different tangents here. Okay. One is about what is available to you in your neighborhood that you do not have control over. Your access to healthcare, your access to healthy food, your access to an education, your access to a career, your access to medical care. Your zip code determines your access to these things. Okay. Now, aside from that, you do have choices. When you reach 18 years old and you graduate, if you haven't made bad choices prior to that, you can make choices that can make a change in your life. But not everything is your fault. You can go to Ivy League schools. You can go to Harvard. You can come out with a PhD, and you can still face discrimination and setbacks that are not your fault. You can be the most qualified person and still not get that job. Is that your fault? You did everything right. Is that your fault? No, it isn't. So that is my point. Yes, you have choices. You do. I listen to the radio on WWL, and I hear Scoot telling Black people all the time, just stop having babies. That's what you're doing. You're having these babies, having babies. Just stop having babies. And I'm like, I've seen mothers who they get to work at 6:30 in the morning. They work for minimum wage. Okay. 7.25 an hour. It ain't changing over 10 years, 15 years, whatever the case may be. And they're working for minimum wage. So they leave their job at 3:30 in the afternoon, okay? And they go to their second job at 5 o'clock till 10, okay? Now they have adolescent children at home. The oldest is watching the youngest, taking care of these children. What do you think these little girls are doing in that time because they don't have anybody to supervise them? What do you think they're doing? Unfortunately, a lot of them are making more babies. And so the cycle perpetuates itself. And I mean, that's a sad commentary, but that is the truth of what happens.
Thank you, Nancy.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll get back in the wrap up, but that is what happens.
Right. Okay. Phyllis, Glenn, and then Larry.
Well, first I want to say, just because similar things happen to white people in this country as happen to Black people does not negate that it's happening to Black people. And white people oppress other white people. That's who's oppressing white people. If we can't blame, especially the white men, the tech bros and Theo bros in this country, who can we blame? I mean, they're doing it all. And in one of the foundations of social work is called person in environment. And that is the idea that you can't just address somebody's personal issues without addressing the bigger societal issues, environmental issues that they have. So, as Nancy's list of things that people might not have in their neighborhood, there's also poor schools. There's also lack of good public transportation all over this country. It's terrible here based on, like, I lived in the Bay Area of California where you can get a train all over the place. And here it's just it's rough. So even if those people in those communities in a food desert, for instance, they don't have the ability, they may not have their own vehicle, they might not be able to afford the gas to travel to where a better grocery store is, they might not have the money to afford groceries in the better grocery store. There's a whole layers and layers of things that you have to look at to help a person, to help a person help themselves. That is really hard. Like, you can tell somebody, well, you need to stop drinking. But if their whole friend group, that's what they do for fun, they don't have any way to go create another friend group in their situation. It's going to be hard for them to quit drinking. So we can't just look at people as individuals. You have to look at the entire environment of not only their family, their neighborhood, but this whole country and how it treats all of us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. We got Glenn.
Yeah, I hope there come a time when we stop hearing these caring white folks that love us so much that they give us some fantastic excuses and no solution, just fantastic reasons why we can't improve. And so we are destined to stay where we at forever. Yes, old Trump is in office, and still with him in office, there will be opportunities. You will still have choices to make. What kind of choices are you going to make? As far as food deserts, we had plenty of stores in our neighborhood, but we didn't support the stores that that stop us from having the food desert. We eat food for taste only. We buy fast food. We you know you know they don't even know how to people have forgot most of these young women don't even know how to cook. The uh, Even fry egg. They like fast foods. They like things that they don't have to prepare.
Oh
So no, they're not interested. They are not interested
gosh.
in not having a food desert. They don't care about if they got a food desert. That's it.
Thank you. We got a clarifying question for you from Nancy.
Oh,
You're muted, Nancy.
Okay. You said young women don't know how to cook. What about young men?
oh, them too. Them rascals don't know how to cook either.
Thank
Okay.
you. Okay, and Larry, you're the last before the wrap up.
Phyllis said that you can't just address a person's personal issues without addressing their environmental issues, and that's where culture comes in. That's where cultures come in. You got to change the culture. And it's up to people to change their culture. If a white man were to call one of my grandchildren a nigger, how does he respond? He's going to go ballistic, or do I teach him? Do I teach him to not let a word overcome him and send him into some kind of great moment of depression because somebody called me a bad word? It's the culture. And our minds have been conditioned. Yes, there was some, when it comes to health issues that this article was talking about, nobody made us become morbidly obese like we are. We became morbidly obese because we chose and continue to choose to eat the wrong food, whether we're black or white. There's some things that I didn't have a choice over. Like when I was in elementary school, I didn't have a choice over putting my hand over my heart and saying the Pledge of Allegiance to a flag that hung over slavery and over lynching and over Jim Crow and over apartheid. I didn't have a choice in that. I didn't have a choice to say whether or not I chose to say one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, knowing it was a lie. This was the brainwashing to this day that caused Negroes to vote for Trump and to think that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves and that Juneteenth is a celebration of that so-called freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, everyone has spoken. So in the wrap up, we're going to just have 1 minute each. And we're going to start with Beatrice.
Great discussion. Thanks, Louise, for the article. I want us to not dismiss the idea that there are stressors that are in the environment. There are things that over which we have no control. There are social determinants of what happens in people's lives that are outside of their control. Yes, we all have personal choices that we can make about some things, but there are those circumstances over which we do not have control. And I think we have to recognize that they are both and not dismiss what this article is saying about stressors and discrimination, because it is true, it exists, whether it is societal violence that we're concerned with, extrajudicial killings of police, whatever the circumstances are, it's true, it is a fact, it exists. And we can't dismiss them by saying, well, if people just did better, if y'all just would stop eating wrong food. We have to recognize that there is an environment in which the survival of African American people is a struggle every day. Conversation.
Thank you. Perfect timing. Nancy.
All right. Well, this was very good article. Brought out a lot of different points of view. Also, I just want to point out one thing about when we talk about addiction. Okay. Addiction is not a choice. All right. Addiction is a malfunction of the brain. Okay. It is just like mental health, just like schizophrenia, bipolar disease, addiction is a mental health disease. All right. People do not have control over that. So to think that, because they choose to become an alcoholic or they choose to become a drug addict is under their control, it is not. Okay. Thank you very much, Louise, for this article. Brought out a lot of inner beliefs about the human, condition.
Well, thank you very much, Nancy, for your great comments as well. I appreciate you. Next we have Larry.
That leads to addiction. In most cases, it's a choice. Nobody starts out saying, I want to become an alcoholic. They started off drinking for social reasons, to experiment, to feel good. And things just started creeping up on them until they began to get addicted to the feeling. Addiction to the substance hadn't set in yet. So we get addicted to the feelings first, and then we get addicted to the substance. So when somebody tell an alcoholic you're going to be an alcoholic all your life, that's a lie. That's a lie from hell. And yes, we do make bad choices. There are stressors that can be overcome by faith, by prayer. And what is there a big void of, even in our discussions on any racism? There's no talk of God. There's no talk of faith. There's no talk of prayer. What do we believe in? What do we believe in? I never hear nobody quoting nobody. And sometimes people get an attitude with me because I might quote Jesus. If you want to quote Aristotle, Socrates, anybody, I don't care. But God, we all are not geniuses. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Pedro, 1 minute.
Yeah, just real quick. I think obviously resilience is a big factor, but it's not enough. I think of the term of musical chairs that people of different races, if I'm white uh, and poor, that socioeconomic status is a very, very powerful determinant. But with musical chairs, we used to play it, 10 chairs, 11 people. But what if you had 10 chairs in 100 people? What happens is there's not enough chairs. There's not enough chairs because of this egregious wealth inequality that this administration and Joe Biden's administration as well, I might add, and every administration before that has upheld and expanded. Lastly, the people in jail are predominantly white, but they're overly represented by people of color. These are people, if you look at the jail system, that did not get a high school diploma. They are overtly poor people. That's what fills our prisons. So let's connect all those dots, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Glenn.
Appreciate everybody's input. Y'all get my brain working. With y'all opposition to the truth. Uh, Thank you. I appreciate it. Bye.
Okay. Um. Where we got? We got Teresa. 1 minute.
Yay! I didn't know if I was going to be next. Glenn, you are not the truth. So, I typed it in the chat, but I didn't know if I'd get to say it. But thank you, Louise, for bringing this article. I want to say ditto to what Beatrice. Beatrice is who I want to be when I grow up. I mean,
I've
she's
always
an
said that
educator
too.
as well. I will say if there was no racism, I would not be as good at racism bingo when I watch the news. I'll just put it to you that way. I wish that was a real game because I would be able to quit my day job because I hit the jackpot like in the ballpark when I first hear a story that breaks and it's just like, "Oh, I bet this who did that is a person of color." And did you guys notice the one who was in Vegas who blew up that Tesla truck, who was a white guy? They brought out the story. Oh, he had PTSD and his
Mhm.
ex-girlfriend, all this sympathy. Didn't say it for the other guy. You know who gave that guy a fair shake? Friggin' Jon Stewart in The Daily Show, not even like a media person. He said, if you knew this guy a couple of years ago, he was into real estate. He said he would have bought real estate from this guy, but that's the only person who I see did a sympathetic story on the guy who did the bombing or ran his truck in New Orleans. Only one. I was like, man, I could be a multimillionaire with my racism bingo. Nobody gives me a prize.
Well, I'll give you a prize.
Thank you.
Um.
Make sure it's a check that has some commas.
Oh, sorry, not that kind of a prize. We have Amal next, please.
Yeah, great article. And a lot of the stresses that the article mentioned Trust me, they're not going nowhere anytime soon. They're going to be here, and it's going back to something Larry said. When those stresses are embedded in the culture, if you don't change the culture, you're going to be dealing with those stresses. And that's the bottom line to the whole situation. They're not going anywhere. They're going to be here. And so it's just a matter of how you handle them. We've lived in this society, many of us, long enough to know and understand what it brings, what comes with it. But then again, there are some people who are in denial, who don't want to believe that these stresses exist and how they impact their lives. So once we can identify the stresses and understand what it is that they do to you, then we could be put in a better position to fix them. And I don't see too many people who probably even want to fix them, but I'm one of them. I'm gonna try my best. So
Thank you, Amal. Marion? No, there you go.
I never hit the keyboard part enough. If I'm afraid of going to break it. I certainly appreciated this article. It was very timely, very appropriate. And at this time, we're transitioning to another era. And I think it was so timely. And I certainly appreciated everyone's comments and contributions. They were all very relevant and worthy. Thanks for this topic. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Marion. And
You're welcome.
Phyllis, 1 minute.
Thank you for the article, Louise, and everybody. Thank you for the discussion. Some of you, I appreciate your comments more than others. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, of course, I wrote down a few things because there was a lot to comment on. Felt bad that I couldn't participate. That's another thing about being the facilitator. You lose the moment of wanting to answer people, but I think we kind of lost the plot, which didn't matter to me because we went on a different kind of route for this discussion, and I think it was all good. But I think it was Larry that says there's, or it's either Larry or Glenn that said something about the stresses. Do we have stress? Yes, African Americans. It's an everyday attack, and also to your point, Larry, when you said it's all a choice, that, and you gave an example of a guy that went in and they're not hiring African Americans. Was that his choice then? That guy not getting the job? That wasn't his choice. There's environmental racism. There's the food deserts that you're all talking about. It is true. They put the food right there in front of your face. It's cheap. You've only got, $2 in your pocket. You go buy a Big Mac. You don't go and buy, something healthier for your kids. It's true. These are all facts, and for trans, we didn't mention trans, they're minority group who are hugely under stresses because you can't walk around without the fear of being attacked, mugged, killed, shot. That's huge stresses, which we don't think about. Female Native Americans being raped, and living in poverty themselves and fear of, it goes on and on. These are not friggin' choices, none of those poor girls were like, I think I'll go get raped tonight. Yay. It's not a friggin' choice. So that was really annoying that you say those things are choices. And Glenn, you are the master at making sweeping generalizations. Sweeping generalizations. You're very good at that. And generalizations don't really work when you're trying to make an intelligent point. Beatrice, your face. So anyway, look, I really am happy with the way that it went today. It was a very interesting talk, and I'm so glad of everyone's participation in it. And I think it was really good. So I thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.